5 p.m. here in Lagos, Nigeria. We welcome our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Thank you for joining us on The World Today. I'm Millicent Nwaka. We begin with scores of dual citizenship holders in Gaza who have been heading towards the Rafah crossing with Egypt as they take advantage of the only opportunity they have to leave the embattled strip following Israeli airstrikes since the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. At least 110 dual nationals have left Gaza so far, and that's according to reports. Also, at least 20 Palestinian patients have left. It is thought that 88 injured Palestinians and around 500 foreign nationals will be allowed out for the first phase of the evacuations. The UK Foreign Office says the departure of British nationals from Gaza will take place in stages over the coming days. Ambulances are also at the border crossing awaiting the injured. In the meantime, telephone, internet services remain completely cut in Gaza, and the health ministry there says 8,796 people have now been killed since the war began, an increase of 271. That's from Tuesday's figure, which was 8,525. In the meantime, Israel says that they understand Egypt is prepared to receive the evacuees following the deal brokered between Egypt, Israel, and Hamas to allow for limited evacuations from the Gaza Strip. Foreign passport holders are at the crossing. One U.S. passport holder said the pass period lacked any minimum parameters for life, with no water, food, nor shelter. He compared the situation with if it had happened in Europe. There would have been more cooperation, he says. Field hospitals in Egypt's Arish are set to be prepared for injured Gazans arriving through the crossing. And about those hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, the armed wing of the Palestinian group says that it will release some foreign hostages from Gaza in the coming days without offering more specifics. Qasem Brigade spokesman Abu Obaida announced the decision in a video address on Tuesday, in which he also promised to turn Gaza into a graveyard and a quagmire for Israeli forces amid increased ground operations. More than 230 people, including Israeli soldiers and civilians, as well as foreigners from numerous countries, were taken captive by Hamas during a deadly assault in Israel on October 7th. Israel human rights groups and the United Nations have called for the immediate release of the hostages, and those with loved ones held captive have called on the Israeli government to secure their release. Meanwhile, Israel Defense Forces IDF have released videos purportedly showing ground operations and IDF strikes in the Gaza Strip. Israel said on Tuesday its forces killed a senior Hamas commander in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. Palestinian health officials said at least 50 Palestinians were killed in the blast at the densely populated refugee camp and 150 wounded. The Israeli military said 11 soldiers were also killed in fighting in Gaza, the biggest one-day loss for the armed forces since Hamas gunmen attacked southern Israel October the 7th, killing about 300 soldiers and some 1,100 civilians. Let's go into Jabalia now, where we see debris, craters, ruined buildings at the refugee camp in northern Gaza after the area was hit by an Israeli airstrike. An Israeli army spokesperson confirmed the attack, saying a senior Hamas commander had been in the area. Several people were killed. UN and other aid officials said Gaza civilians are engulfed by a public health catastrophe, with hospitals struggling to treat snowballing casualties as electricity supplies hit a rout. And Israel's military spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, also confirmed the airstrikes on Jabalia refugee camp and said it targeted a central Hamas stronghold. Officials at Gaza's Indonesian hospital said more than 50 Palestinians had been killed and 150 wounded when tons of aerial explosives struck residential dwellings in the heart of the Jabalia camp in urbanized North Gaza. The Israel military has accused Hamas, which rules the narrow coastal territory, of using civilian buildings as cover for fighter commanders and weaponry, but Hamas denies those accusations. And the VOA's Natasha Mosgovaya joins us now. She's in transit in Israel. Hi, Natasha. We appreciate you joining us on the program. Dual passport holders are making their way out of Gaza through the Rafah crossing. Do we have any idea what the plan is for them across the border? Will they be picked up by their respective countries and returned home?
Well, it really depends on the country and on the numbers of dual nationals there. We also do not know if all of them will be on the list that is approved by the Interior Ministry in Gaza, which is controlled obviously by Hamas. So, for instance, we know that Americans are not necessarily in that first group that is allowed to leave. So it is really dependent on Hamas that is allowing people out, who is allowed out. It's really depends on the countries, how much effort they're willing to invest in getting them out. The UK, I think, as you mentioned previously, is willing to do that. But what about, say, Ukrainian nationals, etc.? Will they be able to provide the logistics? We do not know that. And the only thing we know is that at this point, we're talking about slightly over 500 people that were approved to leave, and slightly over 80 injured people. This is obviously just a tiny number compared to the overall estimate of injuries that people suffered in the past 3 weeks of shelling and fighting in Gaza Strip. Also, we are talking about basically heavy body injuries, right? When you're talking about people that are experiencing this sort of environment for several weeks, we can also assume that there is severe trauma that many people are suffering from and probably need to be treated. By this point, Egypt also kind of limits the number of people they're willing to take in. So those who are injured will be transferred to Sinai Hospital, and others, I assume it is really dependent on their countries and also arrangements that they themselves made in the area.
So essentially, really tough conditions, there. We were wondering, you mentioned those wounded who are being transported by ambulances to Egypt. One would wonder, would they be required to return to Gaza after they get better?
I think that Egypt officials made it very, very clear that they're not willing to be responsible for this conflict or for bearing basically the consequences of the war in Gaza. They said that nobody will force us to do this. So it's really a stark difference again between, say, the war in Ukraine, where multiple countries took in refugees, and Egypt that just said, no, just keep it there. While Hamas also basically told that we are not responsible for civilians, the United Nations should protect them. So in a sense, the people, the civilians of Gaza just are trapped between those entities, with each one with their own interests, and no one is basically willing to facilitate and alleviate their suffering at this point.
Natasha, do you get the feeling that it seems, the Arab neighbors are unwilling to help Palestinians who are stuck in Gaza?
Well, they're willing to provide verbal support, which has been the case for decades, essentially. Basically, for generations, the Palestinians, even those who were born in some other countries, were not necessarily provided the same status or the same employment opportunities, because for the Arab countries, it is sort of a matter of principle to keep them as a leverage, as a point of pressure against Israel, not to allow, any compromise on this. But if you ask many of the Palestinians who became refugees in other countries, whether while the situation, the conflict is unresolved, there is no agreement, for example, on two-state solution, whether they would prefer to have full rights, full job opportunities, and be treated, especially if they were born in these countries, as equal citizens, I would assume that many would say yes.
Israel is also working to free those hostages held by the Hamas militant group. Some, like Private Ori Megadish, they've been freed thanks to the IDF. Has the government said how the others will be released?
Well, since the ground operation is obviously ongoing, the Israeli government and the Israel Defense Forces are releasing very sparse details about the logistics of the operation, not to mention their tactical moves. We do not know how many of those hostages are held together, where exactly, etc. Obviously, they might be used as a human shield. Obviously, it is a factor of consideration for the Israeli Defense Forces while conducting those operations, because if they're held, for instance, in those vast network of tunnels underneath Gaza, anything that happens to these tunnels might obviously bring harm to the hostages. And let's just remind that the latest tally was 240 people, including about 30 kids, including very young kids. So obviously there is public opinion pressure inside Israel to do everything possible to bring them out. And while, again, the operation is ongoing, we won't hear much until, like in the Ori Megadish case, people will be already released.
And apparently the Iron Dome is holding up, given that the death toll is reducing in Israel. But with Bolivia cutting off diplomatic ties and Yemen declaring it is at war with Israel, surely the government has addressed this, and there have been some adjustments to the security architecture in Israel.
Well, Israel definitely is more committed now to facilitating, say, providing humanitarian aid to Palestinians, but it is adamant about continuing the fight against Hamas, because if Israel finishes this military campaign without tangible results, and again, let's mention that it's very difficult to define what victory against Hamas would constitute, because Hamas senior leadership is definitely out of Gaza, and some are saying that Hamas is kind of more of ideology and not only people. So basically, we are in this situation where victory is not clear, and Israel is very much aware of the diplomatic pressure, but also aware of the fact that none of those countries severing ties or voting for resolutions at the UN are capable of solving the security threat that Israel sees in Hamas. Existential, basically, security threat at this point, given what happened on October 7th.
Indeed. Well, Natasha will continue to monitor the situation. Many thanks. VOA's Natasha Mazgovaya. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Well, early this morning, gunfire could be heard ringing across the Israeli-occupied West Bank city of Jenin as Israeli forces raided the city. Hamas and Islamic Jihad on Tuesday say they were fighting Israeli forces in Jenin, where the Palestinian Health Ministry said 4 people were killed on Monday. Following 18 months of steadily escalating violence in the West Bank, Israeli forces appear to have clamped down further since October the 7th attack, making hundreds of arrests and conducting regular raids that have resulted in clashes. In Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi group claims it has launched a large number of drones and ballistic missiles towards Israel after Israel's military said it downed an approaching aerial target of the Red Sea city of Eilat. The operation is known to be the third targeting Israel. Houthi military spokesperson Yahya Sari says in a televised statement that there would be more after an initial warning of a possible hostile aircraft intrusion, which sent residents of the tourist resort of Eilat running for shelter early on Tuesday. The Israeli military had said its systems identified an aerial target approaching Israeli territory, adding that there was no threat or risk to civilians and the defensive action was successful. Yemen's Houthi leader Abdelmalek al-Houthi had warned on October the 10th that if the U.S. intervenes in the Gaza conflict directly, the group will respond by firing drones and missiles and take other military options. Israel's staunch ally, the United States, is sending an additional 300 troops to the Middle East with a focus on providing support in areas like explosive ordnance disposal and communications, according to Pentagon spokesperson Brigadier General Patrick Ryder. The troops will be going from the U.S. but would not be in Israel.
Moving to other updates, today I can announce the decision to deploy an additional 300 troops to the U.S. Central Command region from home stations in the continental United States. These additional troops will provide capabilities in explosive ordnance disposal, communications, and other support enablers for forces already in the region. Please note that we will not discuss specific deployment locations for these forces, but I can confirm they are not going to Israel and that they are intended to support regional deterrence efforts and further bolster U.S. force protection capabilities. Again, we'll continue to keep you updated. What I'm tracking right now is since our self-defense strikes on 26 October, there have been 6 additional, what I would consider small-scale attacks, 3 in Iraq, 3 in Syria. Right now, we're tracking a total of 27 attacks, 16 in Iraq, 11 in Syria. Again, as we see the data miner alerts pop up, we check each of those with CENTCOM, go back to verify the information, and as that information is either verified or batted down, we'll make sure to let you know. In some cases, they just didn't strike anything. Yeah. Again, to my knowledge, no injuries, no damaged infrastructure.
Meanwhile, the White House says 66 trucks of humanitarian assistance has entered Gaza in the last 24 hours and dozens more are expected to be cleared for deliveries. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby told reporters that President Joe Biden would speak later with Jordan's King Abdullah for discussions about Gaza. 8 trucks have been trickling into the Strip from Egypt over the past week via Rafah, the main crossing that does not border Israel.
Medicine. It's the highest. Dozens of more trucks are expected to clear today. Expected to clear. I want to caveat it with that. We're obviously watching this as closely as we can, and we hope that they all get in. But still, again, it's just a fraction of the need. We're also continuing to press for the resumption of essential services, including water and the delivery of fuel. Fuel is going to be critical here, certainly in coming hours and days, as the existing stocks are running low to near empty. And of course, we're supporting efforts for safe passage for civilians in Gaza and those wishing to depart, while making it clear that we will not support any forced relocation of Palestinians outside of Gaza. Now, to that end, and to all of those ends, President Biden will speak with His Majesty King Abdullah II of Jordan this afternoon to discuss further cooperation with Arab partners to address this worsening humanitarian situation. Without getting into this specific moment that we're in right now or litigating this from the White House podium, we do believe that humanitarian pauses could be of value, but they have to be, there has to be credible support on both sides here for where to do it, when to do it, for how long to do it, and for what purpose. And we're continuing to work with partners in the region, including those who have a direct line of communication with Hamas, to see if that's possible. The goal would be to get aid in, to maybe get people out that want to evacuate. It also would be valuable, a humanitarian pause every now and then would be valuable for us if, in fact, there is a serious effort to get hostages out.
Welcome back. Distribution of food and medical supplies is set to be faltering in Gaza due to a chronic lack of fuel, looting of stores, the choking of streets with rubble from Israeli shelling and overcrowding caused by displacement of civilians. And despite an uptick in the trickle of supplies, the number of aid trucks entering Gaza, currently averaging 14 daily, remains tiny compared to the 400 trucks seen daily in normal times for a population of 2.3 million. The UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA, is the one giving these information, saying a break-in by hungry Gazans on Sunday at one of its two warehouses has complicated its work. The second warehouse near the Rafah border crossing with Egypt has also become harder to operate because 8,000 displaced people are sheltering there.
We are also facing challenges with supplies. Supplies that have run out because of the overwhelming need and the distribution, because of the fact that UNRWA continued to distribute from early on, but also because what's coming on these trucks, on this humanitarian convoy, is very, very little. It's only 1% of what Gaza used to bring. So we're asking for an increase in the number of these trucks. We also need fuel in on these trucks. We have not received any fuel, not UNRWA, not the whole of Gaza. No fuel has come into Gaza since the 7th of October. Look, we're facing huge challenges to our operation. First of all, the number of people who have sought shelter in UNRWA schools and facilities is 4 times more than what we had planned for in any of the worst scenarios, if you wish, right? So we are overwhelmed ourselves. Our own teams are overwhelmed and stretched, and they are themselves, many of them have become displaced. We have lost 67 colleagues to date. We have 14 distribution centers in Gaza. Before the war, we used to provide food aid to 1.2 million people across the Gaza Strip. We were forced to close these distribution centers down when the war began and have gone to alternative ways of giving out the wheat, including giving wheat to bakeries across the Gaza Strip, where we have contributed as UNRWA to reducing the price of bread to half of it. Now, we have 2 very big warehouses. Unfortunately, one of them was broken into a couple of days ago. A lot was taken from it. That included mainly food items, so like wheat flour mainly, and some supplies like cleaning material.
Bolivia has cut off official ties with Israel over the war in Gaza, as 2 other Latin American countries recall their ambassadors in Tel Aviv for consultations. Deputy Foreign Minister Freddy Mamani said at a press conference Tuesday night that his country has decided to break diplomatic relations with the Israeli state in repudiation and condemnation of the aggressive, disproportionate Israeli military offensive taking place in the Gaza Strip. The nation also announced the country would send humanitarian aid to Gaza. In response, Israel accused Bolivia of capitulation to terrorism and to the Ayatollah regime in Iran and played down Bolivia's decision, saying relations between the countries had been devoid of content anyway, since Luis Arce was sworn in as president. However, Hamas welcomed Bolivia's decision, urged Arab countries that have normalized their relations with Tel Aviv to do the same. And the 2 other Latin American countries that have recalled their ambassadors in Tel Aviv for consultation as Bolivia's neighbors, Colombia and Chile, they are condemning the deaths of civilians in Gaza and calling for a ceasefire. Historically, Latin America's left-leaning countries have sympathized with the Palestinian cause, while the more right-wing countries have tended to follow the lead of the United States. Writing on social media site X, Chilean President Gabriel Boric accused Israel of unacceptable violations of international humanitarian law and following a policy of collective punishment of the people of Gaza, as he announced the recall of Ambassador Jorge Carvalho. Chile, on the other hand, has the largest and one of the oldest Palestinian communities outside the Arab world. Also writing on X, Colombian President Gustavo Petro called the attacks a massacre of the Palestinian people. Other Latin American countries, including Mexico and Brazil, have also called for a ceasefire. The president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, is calling for more broad reforms, highlighting the United Nations Council's limitations when addressing conflicts, especially where an instigator can have veto power, while condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine and militant group Hamas' October 7th attack on Israel. He stressed the need for peaceful resolutions to both crises without overruling Security Council decisions. He made this known during a welcome ceremony for German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at the Jubilee House.
Perhaps the most interesting is the location.
I think we have all seen in recent times that the Council, in many ways, is not fit for purpose in dealing with questions to do with international peace and security. The classic example is what is happening over the Ukraine conflict, where the nation that is the aggressor is also the veto-wielding country, and which is blocking any initiatives that the Security Council can take over the conflict. In the same way, we were very clear and vocal in our condemnation of the attack on Israel on the 7th of October by the Hamas organization, and recognized fully Israel's right to protect itself and defend itself. But at the same time, you look at the humanitarian consequences of what is going on over there. There's clearly a need for us, all of us, the international community, the global community, to look beyond the immediate issues of the consequences of the Hamas attacks on Israel, to be looking at the possibility of a comprehensive settlement of this matter.
Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo. A sad report on one of the hostages taken by Hamas. Parents to 22-year-old Shani Louk had hoped after seeing a video of their daughter, a German-Israeli national, paraded around by Hamas militants in Gaza. Parents Nassim and Ricarda still had hope that their daughter was alive and was being held hostage. But on Monday, after nearly 3 weeks of waiting, their hopes were dashed. Israeli forensics investigators informed them that they had identified a fragment of Shani's skull and confirmed that she had most likely been killed during the Hamas October 7th assault across southern Israel. Speaking from their family home in central Israel on Tuesday, Luke's mother, Ricarda, said she was very sad but relieved. Her father says he's also relieved that she didn't have to suffer.
Of course, as a father, I'm sad that all this happened. But from the other hand, I'm a little bit relieved because, first of all, she didn't suffer. She died right on spot while driving, actually. Before driving. And she didn't suffer at all. They took only the body. And they took only the body to Gaza to do whatever they want there. I don't care. And she never suffered. Just before that, she was dancing all night in the party. And she was with her best friends, and she was happy and dancing and hugging and loving, and few minutes, I'm sure it was few seconds actually, of fear from the unknown and death. But this contrast between dancing and beauty and love and happiness.
But she was also a very unconventional girl, let's say. She really knew exactly what she wants to do. She was independent. She lived in Tel Aviv and was earning her own money, but she was happy and she enjoyed and had fun and traveled. So she really used the time to do all the beautiful things she wanted to do. At least that we know.